your partner supports you in finding all the human energies in yourself. That would be a soulmate, one who helps you find your completeness in yourself, rather than the one who's supposed to provide the other half of who you can be. It's a combination of common sense and experience in relationships and with clients over the years. And I'm a believer in Buddhist practices as really helpful in forming and maintaining healthy relationships. The two specific practices are mindfulness, in which we stay in the present without judging and without trying to force a particular outcome, and loving kindness, which has to do with being present in a loving, compassionate, joyful, and serene way. I've been attempting to pull together what is the best of psychology, like what we learned from Freud and Jung, and what we can discover from a spiritual orientation. And my spiritual orientation is mainly from Buddhism and from the Jungian perspective. Jung has an appreciation of the archetypes, the common motifs that people have noticed in themselves and expressed in stories. For instance, energies that have to do with mother, father, wise guide, villain, trickster. And I'm becoming aware that the more we're able to see those kinds of energies in ourselves, the more successful we'll be in relationships, rather than simply projecting all those energies onto others. For instance, if you're in a relationship and you see your partner as the one who's supposed to mother you, it's not going to be as successful as if you become aware that you can mother yourself, because you have that energy in you also. It's not going to be as strong as it is in a female, if you're a male, but it is there. And so your partner supports you in finding all the human energies in yourself. That would be a soulmate, one who helps you find your completeness in yourself, rather than the one who's supposed to provide the other half of who you can be. The specific needs that I concentrate on, which are called the 5 keys to mindful loving, are the same needs that we had in our childhood. We have a need for attention. In other words, someone who will notice our needs and feelings and be able to hold them without judgment and with an engaged focus, rather than being so caught up in their own selves that they can't really see us or hear us or get us. In addition, we have a need to be accepted as we are, rather than made into what the other person needs us to be. We have a need to be appreciated for what we bring to the relationship and for who we are. We have a need for physical affection, shown appropriately. Could include sex or not, in accord with the nature of the relationship. And finally, we have a need to be allowed to pursue our own deepest needs and wishes without being controlled by the other. So the opposite of allowing is controlling. Now these 5, which I call the 5 A's, attention, acceptance, appreciation, affection, and allowing, are the same 5 needs that we had in infancy. So I'm believing that we have those same 5 all through our lifespan. And in adult life, or beginning in adolescence, we're looking for someone who will be present in those 5 ways, who will fulfill those needs, not 100% the way our parents were meant to do, but at least enough so that we can feel them coming our way. And then we also show those same 5 to our partner. When it goes in both directions, that would be intimacy. How do I know someone loves me? I can tell by the level of attention, acceptance, appreciation, and so forth. How do I know the other loves me? I pay attention, I accept, I appreciate, so forth. How do I know I love myself? Same 5. And I call it mindful loving because it's totally present in the here and now. I mean, that's the only way it could happen. You can only pay attention in the present. One way to cultivate them is through mindfulness meditation, in which each day you do pay attention to what you're feeling and thinking without judging any of that, just noticing it and moving through it. And another way is to show those 5 whenever possible. So if somebody's having a hard time, you don't judge them for how they've messed their life up. You accept what's happening attentively and affectionately, appreciating the pain that they're in, allowing them to feel the pain, but remaining present with them. That would be an example of how you practice showing these 5 A's. One of my books is called When the Past is Present. There probably isn't any day in which something from the past is not affecting you. And it certainly shows itself in relationships. It was Freud who came up with the word transference. And of course, he was referring to the relationship between the patient and the doctor. He noticed that especially the female patients were seeing him as a kind of father figure. They had had harsh, rigid, strict fathering, and they could trust him to be gentle toward them. So he came up with this realization that we transfer onto people that we meet up with who become important to us. In fact, this is why they become important to us, because they somehow resemble our parents, our early caregivers, and we transfer the expectations, attitudes, and feelings that we had toward our parents onto our therapists. But for our discussion, we also do that a lot with our partners. So the longer you're with someone, the more do you train that person to be like one of your parents, or already have chosen a partner who is like one of your parents, I see this as ultimately positive because your psyche is trying to finish up old business. And so it looks for someone who will play the part of one of your parents, or both, so that you can finally lay to rest the ancient disappointments, hurts, and losses of early life. Or if you had, Donna Reed kind of parenting, you might look for a partner that you imagine will treat you the same way she treated her family. Follow what I mean? And so then it would have more of a positive orientation, but it's still an expectation. It's mostly unconscious, you don't really notice it. But what looks like an adult transaction between two people, two men, two women, or male and female, actually may be picking up on and repeating scenarios from the distant past. The best way to notice is to ask yourself, which of those 5 A's did my parents really come through with, and which did they not come through with? So wherever there's a deficit, like let's say they didn't accept you as you are. They paid a lot of attention to you, but the attention was more like scrutiny rather than true attentiveness, which has more of a holding feeling. Whereas scrutiny has more of a, I'm up here looking down at you to see if you're doing the right thing. Like a school teacher looking at students, let's say, in grammar school. So, in some of our experience. So, when your relationship has a lot of that kind of energy in it, then you start to notice it, that's when you will, that's the equivalent of becoming conscious. Secondly, you work on this not by blaming your parents or holding on to old resentments about how they messed you up or messed up. Instead of going there, you simply grieve the past with all its losses. And that's how you actually let it go. Then you will not be looking for your parents' face on someone else. How does one grieve the past? You will let yourself feel sad about what you missed out on. You will let yourself feel angry about how they failed you. You're not expressing this anger to them directly because they are not who they were originally. So this is all about experiences in the past. And finally, you could admit your own fear. Fear of how you'll never find anybody who will love you as you really wanted to be loved. As long as you're under the thumb of what happened in the past, you're constricted, your movement is limited. It's only when you're finally free of that possession by those demons that you are free to move around in the world just as you are and to see others just as they are. A relationship seems to work best when people look at the conflicts that are coming up rather than avoiding them, sweeping them under the rug, or minimizing the impact. So the two people check in with each other about what's happening that has become a conflict. So that's addressing the conflict. Secondly, you try to process it by talking it out, communicating back and forth what each of you feels without judging the other, showing directly how what's happening in the present resembles something from childhood. You always want to bring that in. When you do this, I have to admit, it reminds me of what my mother did. That adds extra energy onto it, which I know is about her and not about you. So I need to admit that. Anyway, that's when you work that way and when you talk about the feelings and the needs that are being fulfilled or not, that's called processing. So first addressing, then processing, and then third, making some type of an agreement to do things differently in the future. That's resolving. Resilience happens when you can easily, directly admit that there's a problem, and you have a technology of processing that you bring to it, and then you make an agreement and keep it. Now you have a true commitment. What is a commitment? A combination of handling the struggles and keeping the agreements that have resolved the struggles. Doing that as often as possible is the equivalent of being resilient with what happens. It has to be a two-way street. So a relationship can only work if both people realize it takes work. And then both people try to find out what the work is. And third, both people engage in the work.